Shout out to aerospaceprojectsreview.com, your home of everything never built. Check them out down in the description. In 1958, a new shadow took to the sky that terrified Washington. A Soviet bomber that could seemingly fly forever and was outside even the technological reach of the brightest minds of the United States by decades. What was its secret? It was nuclear powered. The United States needed a rival project to beat back the Russians, and thus a top secret race to build a nuclear bomber began. That's right, all the various aerospace engineering firms in the United States had grand plans to bring in a new age of nuclear power bomber aircraft, from Boeing to Northrop, and even those pesky Soviets had some tricks up their sleeves too. But to cover each of these concepts would take a lifetime, and many of them are barely a footnote in the history of aviation. So why not put together a colossal compilation of nuclear bomber projects, what happened, and what could have been? Our deep dive into nuclear bombers actually starts at the other side of the Iron Curtain, as the USSR was the only country in the world to build a true nuclear-powered aircraft. Or did they? On the 1st of December 1958, Aviation Week ran an article talking about how there were rumors of a new Soviet nuclear-powered bomber jet, one that had done several tests across the bloc. Its mission was to provide an early detection system, as well as hold nuclear weapons as a deterrent to the West. The article had everything from blueprints to photographs, and even ran an ad for a plastic model of the plane. But here's the thing, this wasn't real. It turns out that it was just a prototype conventional bomber, the M50 Bounder. It was considered a failure, and only the prototype saw any flying on normal petrol chemicals. But this nuclear scare fueled several different avenues of research in the United States, including resuming funding of nuclear-powered engines from way back in the 1940s. The US had developed several different engine designs, but it was thought as an unnecessary improvement over petrol engines at the time. But this new Soviet hoax pushed the USA to bring forward plans for its first nuclear plane, the X-6 Crusader. To begin, the United States would need a prototype. The US would build a nuclear reactor inside of a damaged by a tornado Convair B-36 and call it the NB-36. This is what it would be like. The original crew and avionics cabin was replaced by a massive lead and rubber-lined 11-ton crew section for a pilot, co-pilot, flight engineer, and 2 nuclear engineers. Even the small windows were lined with 30 centimeters, 12 inches, of lead glass. The aircraft was also fitted with a 1 megawatt air-cooled reactor at a weight of 16,000 kilograms or 35,000 pounds. It was kept in the middle bomb bay for easy access and loading and unloading so that radioactive sources could be kept safely underground beneath test flights. This design was only created to test the radioactive shielding for the crew. The nuclear reactor was not connected to any of the propulsion systems of the plane. The plan was to develop a production model of this bomber, something looking like the B-60 but nuclear powered, dubbed the Convair X-6 Crusader. This would allow the USA Air Force to field a aircraft that didn't need to land, could be constantly flying with nuclear weapons on board as a deterrent to the Soviets, much like a role that is filled by submarines today, but they got only as far as building the hangar for the aircraft, and the project was even cancelled before they could build the 4,600 meter long runway, which was needed for such a heavy aircraft. The nuclear-powered B-36 prototype plane would go on to record 215 hours of flights, with 89 having the nuclear reactor switched on. It was testing the shielding for the cockpit, finding it adequate for protection for the flight crew. But it never used the nuclear reactor to power the engines. The project was then scrapped after $1 billion investment, but the USA would use its research as a canvas and roadmap to develop several new bomber designs from Boeing, Northrop, Lockheed, Convair, and many more. It was called the WS-125, and it was an American super long-range strategic bomber used during the Cold War with a nuclear-powered engine, and it was scheduled to be the designation the B-72. Our first concept actually begins with our good old friends at Northrop, who envisioned a special version of the flying wing concept. Listed by Popular Science, it showed the vast wing area of the flying wing with turboprops that would be given over to nuclear reactors and shielding, with 4 separate reactors for each turbine. Naturally, if you've seen my flying wing video that I posted only a week ago, you unfortunately know where this program goes. There were also several other follow-up designs, including some sci-fi looking asymmetrical wing designs, which I think would have made very cool looking bomber aircraft. Northrop's engineer Olinga also came up with this other design for a nuclear plane. It had a hub at the front that had the ability to be detached when it was at an airport to be replaced with other ammunition or more nuclear fuel, with the cockpit in a separate plane attached on the tail and the rear of the aircraft that could escape if there were any issues in flight. Perhaps even the whole construct could have been used as a nuclear weapon if needed. Other contenders included Pratt & Whitney with Lockheed in a competitive engine airframe development to address the requirement. This design was a radical departure from the other aircraft and had supersonic in mind. Other designs from the time include one from de Havilland, which was a supersonic bomber that could fly at Mach 2.5 using nuclear power. Unfortunately, these concepts, just like the X-6, would end up being scrapped. But interestingly, the engineers did manage to get 2 General Electric J87 turbofan engines to be powered successfully by 2 nuclear reactors. So the technology was there, leading some of the other branches and civil markets to consider putting nuclear reactors in their own aircraft. The US Navy was also interested in a nuclear bomber aircraft and thought that its Martin 331 would be a good candidate for nuclear engine conversion. It would be used for deep sea patrols, especially since its range was pretty much infinity, and allow the US Navy to truly project its force. This plane deserves its own video, but you can imagine a nuclear version would be something else. It would also have its own boats to service the reactor at sea. And speaking of seaplanes, there was also a design from Curtiss Wright with Convair to build an atomic seaplane with retractable skis, as seen here. There was also a plan to take that XC-99 and turn that into a nuclear aircraft. It would mean that the 6 engines would now be redundant and be replaced by only 2 nuclear-powered engines. This would have been a radical improvement on the design, but as we know, the XC-99 was never picked up, so its nuclear-power derivative never happened. An also honourable mention about derivatives was the B-52 test nuclear version that had a nuclear reactor connected to the side of the plane like a parasitic engine, as well as turning the C-5 Galaxy into a nuclear aircraft. But again, that's a whole nother bucket of fish and something for a future video. But I want you to know this whole time the USSR were not sitting idly by. The Soviets had made some progress themselves with a physical creation, attaching a nuclear reactor to a Tupolev 95. but it never flew on its own nuclear power, only testing the radiation shielding for the cockpit. The engineers had grand plans once this worked to build something called the Tu-119 and then eventually the Tu-135. But the experimental project was cancelled. Had these prototype nuclear-powered conversions worked, the Soviets would have moved on to building specific planes that were designed from the start to be nuclear-powered. The first of these was the M60, that would do away with those flaws of the M50 that had happened decades earlier, such as not being nuclear-powered. This is such a huge project that I'll have to do another video on this Soviet creation, but needless to say, it was a Soviet seaplane bomber that was something else. There was also the M30 that had a delta wing design, and there was proposed to be a nuclear-powered Tu-114. But of all these projects, both from USA and Russia, ended up coming to a halt. Why? So why did none of these concepts ever see the light of day? Well, for the military, the primary use case of a nuclear engine was in a bomber aircraft, to allow it to fly constantly and not be discoverable, as part of a nuclear deterrence fleet. But by the mid-1960s, nuclear submarines had started to fill that role. They had several advantages and could launch missiles reaching deeper into inland, beating the technology of planes. Because no large aircraft were being built with nuclear engines, the technology had little access to be transferred to the civil markets. Plus, we can't ignore all the inherent risks with nuclear engines back then. Airlines were reluctant to use the technology in their own fleets. You can imagine if a plane had a leak in the reactor, it would end up irritating most of the Midwest. Yikes. Thus, all we have today is this video. I've done a full video about several of these concepts, like the Lockheed nuclear tug that was designed to drag C-5 Galaxies across the ocean, as well as the colossal nuclear-powered CL-1201 that is my most popular video right here on the channel, and if you haven't seen it, then you have to go right now. And if you enjoyed this concept today, then jump on and subscribe. There are so many more to cover and see, and I do hope that you join me for them. Let me know down in the comments what's your favorite. And if you want more aviation news and content, then I actually have another channel called Aviation Station, which you can check out right here. I'll put the link down in the description for you. This video wouldn't have been possible without the help from Scott from Aerospace Projects Review. He's done a huge list of various different nuclear-powered projects, and you seriously must go check out his website right now. That the link is down in the description. And also another special thanks to all the members of Secret Projects. It's a great community of people who discuss different various secret projects, and something that I also highly recommend, if you're not a member of, to join today. This video was only possible with help from my Patreons, who have sat tirelessly by my side as I fumble around trying to make videos about planes. So thanks for buying me all those late night coffees, and I couldn't have done it without you. Thanks for watching my little videos.